I didn't build that snowman to be cute. I built it because winter makes people careless, and careless people don't ask questions. From the street, it looked harmless. Lopsided smile, crooked stick arms, an old scarf I found in the garage. Just another snowman in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever really happens. Or at least that's what everyone thought. It was early evening, the kind where the sky turns steel gray and the cold sinks into your bones. The neighborhood was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the crunch of tires on packed snow. I stood by the window with a mug gone cold in my hands, watching flakes fall gently onto the driveway. That snowman sat right in the center, bold and obvious. Too obvious. And I knew it was only a matter of time before someone took issue with it. That's when I heard the engine. It wasn't speeding at first. Just the low, impatient growl of an SUV slowing down in front of my house. I didn't need to see her face to know who it was. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. The HOA Karen. Perfect hair, perfect house, perfect sense of entitlement. She had rules for everything. Where you parked, how high your grass could grow, even what decorations were acceptable. And apparently, a snowman in my own driveway crossed some invisible line in her world. I watched as her headlights washed over the snowman. She stopped, sat there for a second, long enough for me to feel that familiar knot tighten in my chest. I'd had run-ins with the HOA before, letters taped to my door, friendly reminders that didn't feel friendly at all. This time, though, something felt different, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. She stepped out of the SUV, phone already in her hand, recording. I could see her lips moving, probably narrating about safety hazards and HOA violations. She gestured toward the snowman like it was a personal insult. From where I stood, I could almost hear her voice, sharp, certain, convinced she was in the right. Then she got back in the car. I remember thinking, she wouldn't. No one would actually do that. But entitlement has a way of making people bold. The engine revved. Snow sprayed from the tires. And before my mind could catch up, the SUV lurched forward. The impact was loud. A deep, hollow thud followed by the explosion of snow in every direction. The snowman didn't just fall apart. It vanished. White powder filled the air like smoke, settling slowly onto the driveway and the hood of her car. For a split second, everything was quiet again. I didn't move. I just stared. Because beneath all that snow, something dark and solid had been hit. Something that wasn't supposed to be seen yet. Her door opened. She stepped out, laughing at first, still filming. But then she noticed it. The sound she made wasn't laughter anymore. It was confusion. Fear, maybe. Her phone lowered. Her shoulders stiffened. I felt my heart start to pound. Not with panic, but with a strange, calm certainty. This was the moment I'd been bracing for since the first snowfall. The moment someone crossed a line they didn't even know existed. In the distance, I heard sirens. Someone must have already called it in. An accident, she'd probably say. But accidents don't usually uncover secrets. As flashing lights reflected off the snow and her confidence visibly drained away, one question hung in the freezing air, unanswered and heavy. When the truth under that snowman finally came to light, who was really going to pay the price? The sirens grew louder, then faded into the background of my thoughts. I barely noticed them. My focus was locked on the patch of driveway where the snowman used to stand. Snow was melting faster there now. Slush forming around something that didn't belong in a winter decoration. Something solid. Heavy. The kind of thing you don't want strangers asking questions about. People always assume conflicts with an HOA start over nothing. A mailbox color. A trash bin left out too long. In my case, it started the day I moved in. I wasn't like the others on the block. I didn't wave enough. Didn't attend meetings. Didn't care about matching holiday lights or approved lawn ornaments. That made me a problem before I ever did anything wrong. She noticed immediately. The HOA Karen had knocked on my door less than a week after I unpacked. Clipboard in hand. Smile that never reached her eyes. She talked about community standards and keeping property values strong. I nodded, listened, kept my answers short. The less you give people like that, the more it bothers them. After that came the notes. Then the warnings. Then the quiet threats about fines and enforcement. What she never knew was that I had my own reasons for staying under the radar. That driveway wasn't just concrete to me. It was the only place on the property no one ever questioned. Backyards get inspected. Garages get peered into. But a snow-covered driveway in winter? That's invisible. People see what they expect to see, especially people convinced they're in control. The snowman idea came during the first heavy snowfall. I remember standing outside, breath fogging the air, hands numb as I packed snow layer by layer. Anyone watching would have thought I was just another bored homeowner killing time. I made it intentionally messy, a little crooked, harmless. I wanted it to look stupid enough that no one would suspect it was deliberate. It worked better than I expected. Kids pointed at it when they walked by. Neighbors smiled. Even she ignored it at first. Until she didn't. Something about it sitting in the driveway must have gotten under her skin. Maybe she saw it as defiance. Or maybe she just needed another reminder that not everything in the neighborhood bent to her rules. Standing there now, with flashing lights bouncing off nearby houses, I could see the shift in her posture. The confidence she'd carried like armor was cracking. She kept glancing at the exposed spot, then back toward the road, like she was trying to decide which direction danger was coming from. A memory surfaced, one I usually kept buried. A conversation months earlier, late at night, when a friend had warned me, "If anyone ever finds out, it won't matter why you did it. They'll only care what it looks like." At the time, I'd brushed it off. I told myself I was being careful. Smarter than that. But careful only works until someone decides to floor it through a snowman. The police cars slowed as they approached. Doors opened. Boots crunched on snow. I stayed where I was, just inside my front door, unseen but watching. From this angle, I could see her trying to explain. Her hands moved fast. Too fast. The phone was gone now, either turned off or shoved into her coat pocket. Recording wasn't fun anymore. One of the officers looked down at the driveway. His head tilted slightly. That small movement sent a ripple of unease through me. I knew that look. Curiosity. The moment when a routine HOA dispute turns into something else entirely. This wasn't just about a damaged snowman anymore. It was about intent. About why something was placed there in the first place. About what happens when control collides with secrets. I thought about all the small choices that led to this moment. Buying this house because it was quiet. Choosing not to argue back. Letting people underestimate me. Every decision felt distant now, like pieces on a board that had already been set in motion. Outside, she crossed her arms tightly, trying to hold herself together. The cold wasn't what made her shiver. It was the realization that she might have gone too far this time. That her authority, her rules, her sense of being untouchable, none of that protected her from consequences she didn't understand yet. The officer took a step closer to the exposed spot. Just one step. My pulse thudded in my ears. Not fear exactly. More like anticipation mixed with dread. Once certain things are seen, they can't be unseen. And once questions start, they don't stop. As the snow continued to fall softly around us all, one thought repeated in my mind, steady and unavoidable. She thought she was enforcing the rules, but she just uncovered something that didn't belong to any rulebook at all. The officer didn't touch anything yet. He just stared at the exposed patch like he was trying to decide whether it was worth the paperwork. That pause stretched longer than it should have, and in that space, everyone started projecting their own fears onto the silence. A couple of neighbors had drifted closer by now. Not too close. No one ever wants to be the first person fully involved, but close enough to pretend they were just checking what happened. Curtains moved. Porch lights flicked on. Phones appeared in hands, held low and angled carefully. This neighborhood loved rules, but it loved gossip even more. She noticed them too. Her voice grew louder, sharper, like volume could replace control. She kept repeating the same phrases. Accident, obstruction, safety hazard. She said the snowman shouldn't have been there in the first place. She said she was doing her duty. Every sentence pushed responsibility away from her and toward me, even though I hadn't said a word yet. That was always her pattern. I'd seen it before. At one HOA meeting months back, she'd publicly called out an elderly man over a garden gnome that wasn't on the approved list. He'd stood there, embarrassed, mumbling an apology while she smiled like she was doing him a favor. Everyone else stayed quiet, including me. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that staying invisible was smarter. Now, standing in the shadow of my own front door, I felt that old choice pressing down on me. Do you step forward and speak? Or do you let the narrative form without you? The problem with staying quiet is that silence always gets filled by someone else. One of the officers finally asked her a question I couldn't hear from inside, but I saw the effect immediately. Her face tightened. Her eyes flicked, just for a second, toward me, toward my house. That glance carried accusation, like she was already building a story where I was the villain. I thought about walking out then, about saying something calm and reasonable, about explaining just enough to keep things from escalating. But another thought followed close behind. Once you start explaining, you give people permission to dig. And digging was the one thing I couldn't afford. The snow kept falling, light and steady, trying its best to cover the mess again. But it was too late. The shape beneath the slush was becoming clearer. One neighbor leaned closer, squinting. Another whispered something and shook their head. Speculation spread faster than cold. I remembered the night I decided to put it there, the weight of it in my hands, the way the snow muffled sound, making everything feel unreal. I told myself it was temporary, that it would only be for a little while, long enough to figure out my next move, long enough to stay ahead of something I didn't want catching up to me. That was my flaw. I always believed I had more time. Outside, a second police car pulled up. More lights, more attention. The situation was slipping out of the neat, controllable box she liked to keep things in. And ironically, that loss of control mirrored my own. We were both standing on opposite sides of the same problem, pretending we weren't. One officer knelt slightly, careful not to touch, just close enough to inspect. He called something out to his partner. Not words I could make out, but the tone shifted. Professional curiosity turning into alert focus. Her confidence cracked again. She crossed her arms tighter, then uncrossed them, then gestured too widely, like she didn't know what to do with her hands. I caught a flash of something raw in her expression. Not anger this time, but fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes rules won't save them. A strange empathy stirred in me, unwanted and inconvenient. I didn't like her, but I understood that feeling. The sense that one bad moment can unravel months of careful control. The difference was I'd planned for risk. She hadn't. A neighbor I barely knew called out my name from across the street. Casual, curious, dangerous. I didn't answer. Pretending not to hear felt cowardly, but stepping out felt worse. My heart hammered as if it could somehow give me away. In that moment, I realized the story was no longer just about an HOA Karen or a destroyed snowman. It was about perception, about who people believed, about how quickly someone becomes suspicious simply by being different, quiet, or private. The officer stood up again and looked around, scanning the houses. His gaze passed over mine for a split second. I couldn't tell if he saw me. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. What I did know was this: whatever was under that snow had already done its job. It had exposed more than just itself. It had revealed cracks in authority, in judgment, in the idea that following rules keeps you safe. As the cold deepened and the crowd grew, a heavy truth settled in my chest. Someone was going to push this further. Someone was going to ask the wrong question. And when they did, staying invisible might no longer be an option. The night seemed to close in on itself. Snow fell harder now, thick flakes swallowing sound, turning the world muffled and unreal. Red and blue lights pulsed against white, painting the houses in nervous flashes. What should have been a simple HOA dispute had turned into something that didn't belong on a quiet suburban street. An officer asked for my name. Just hearing it sent a jolt through me. I stepped outside before anyone could call it again. The cold hit my face, sharp and grounding. Every footstep toward the driveway felt heavier than the last. The neighbors watched openly now. No pretending. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. She turned when she saw me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and whatever she'd been holding onto snapped. "There he is," she said, voice tight. "That's the homeowner." The words landed like an accusation. I nodded to the officers, kept my hands visible, my tone calm. Years of avoiding attention had taught me that panic invites questions. Calm delays them. They asked me about the snowman. I answered carefully. Yes, I built it. Yes, it was on my property. No, I didn't expect anyone to drive through it. Short sentences. Nothing extra. She interrupted constantly, talked over me, claimed she'd warned me before, claimed it was a safety issue. Her voice cracked on the last part, just slightly. She could feel the control slipping, and she was fighting it with volume. One of the officers raised a hand. Silence fell. He gestured toward the ground. "What's under there?" The question hung in the air. I felt it in my chest. A slow, heavy thud. This was the line. Step over it, and there was no going back. I met his eyes, measured my words, and said the only thing that bought time. "I'd rather not speculate." That did not go over well. Her head snapped toward me. "Speculate?" she repeated, disbelief dripping from the word. "You put something under a snowman in a driveway, and now you don't want to speculate?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Suspicion fed on itself. The officer crouched again, closer this time. Snow soaked into his pant leg as he brushed slush aside with a gloved hand. Just enough to reveal an edge. Dark. Unmistakably not decorative. I watched his fingers pause. He stood up slowly. "We're going to need to clear this area," he said. That was it. The point of no return. Another officer began guiding neighbors back. Some protested. Phones rose higher. Someone muttered about property values, like that still mattered. She stood frozen now, arms wrapped around herself, face pale under the flashing lights. I caught her whispering, almost to herself, "I didn't know." And for the first time, I believed her. A supervisor arrived. Older, quieter. He listened more than he spoke. He looked at the ground, then at me. His gaze lingered longer than I liked. "Anything you want to tell us before we proceed?" he asked. Every instinct screamed at me to say something, to explain, to justify. But explanations can sound like excuses when people are already suspicious. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I'd prefer to wait." That answer changed the mood completely. Gloves snapped tighter. Radios crackled. Procedures kicked in. What had been curiosity hardened into protocol. And protocol has a way of stripping people down to facts they can't talk their way out of. She started pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. Her heels crunched into the snow. Erratic. Uneven. She kept glancing at her SUV, at the dented hood, like she was realizing for the first time how permanent damage can be. One of the officers took photos. Another marked the spot. The snowman's remains were barely recognizable now. Just dirty snow and scattered sticks. Whatever innocence it once suggested was gone. I felt something twist in my gut. Not regret. Something closer to inevitability. The supervisor gave a quiet order. They brought out tools. Not to dig fully. Not yet. Just enough to see. As the first layer of snow was carefully moved aside, the shape underneath became clearer. Defined. Deliberate. Absolutely not random. Her breath caught. I heard it from where I stood. One of the neighbors gasped. The officer froze, hand hovering just above the surface. "Sir," he said to me without looking up. "We need you to step back." I did. Every step felt like I was walking away from the last moment of control I had. The snow fell. The lights flashed. The crowd held its breath. And as the outline beneath the snow finally revealed its true form, I realized there was no version of tonight that ended quietly anymore. The officer's hand stopped inches from the surface. Then his radio crackled. Not loud. Not urgent. Just enough to break the spell. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing, and looked at the supervisor. "We need to pause," he said. "Dispatch just flagged something." That single sentence shifted everything. The tools were lowered. The careful excavation halted. For a moment, no one moved. The snow kept falling, settling into the half-cleared shape like it was trying to hide it again. The supervisor stepped aside to take the radio. His voice dropped low. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the change in his posture. Less procedural, more alert. She noticed it too. Her head snapped up, eyes darting between the officers. Hope flickered there, thin, fragile, but real. Whatever they'd just heard, she thought it might save her. She was wrong. Across the street, a neighbor leaned toward another and whispered something that made them both glance at me, then at her, then back at me again. That back and forth look tightened something in my chest. The story was starting to split, branching into versions I couldn't control. The supervisor came back, his expression unreadable. "We're expanding the perimeter," he said, "and we're asking everyone involved to remain available." "Involved?" she asked sharply. "I was in an accident." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You drove through a structure on private property after prior disputes with the homeowner. That makes you involved." Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time all night, she had no immediate comeback. Another officer approached me quietly. Not aggressive, not friendly, neutral. "Sir," he said, "do you have any prior reports, complaints, or ongoing issues with the HOA?" There it was, the past finally catching up. "Yes," I said. "Several." She stiffened. The officer turned slightly, addressing both of us now. "We've been notified of previous calls from this address. Noise complaints, obstruction complaints. One report about suspicious behavior during winter months." Her face drained of color. That report wasn't supposed to matter. It had gone nowhere. I'd been told as much. But now, standing in the snow with flashing lights and half-buried secrets, it mattered a lot. "I was just doing my job," she said, voice shaking. "The HOA requires us to report." "You're not law enforcement," the supervisor cut in calmly. "And you're not authorized to take enforcement action with a vehicle." The words hit her harder than shouting ever could. I watched her process that, the realization that she hadn't just lost control of the situation. She'd created it. And not by accident. At the same time, another officer was speaking into his radio, his back turned to us. I caught fragments. A name. A date. My name. My stomach tightened. This was the twist I hadn't planned for. I prepared for discovery. For questions. Even for consequences. What I hadn't accounted for was the way her actions and mine were now being examined side by side, threaded together into a single narrative. Crossing lines changes how stories get told. She turned toward me suddenly, eyes sharp despite the fear. "You knew," she said, not loud, just enough for me to hear. "You knew this would happen." I didn't answer, because the truth was complicated. And complicated truths sound like lies when emotions are high. The officer by the driveway called out, "We've got markings." That did it. Phones rose higher. Neighbors leaned forward again, forgetting the perimeter. The supervisor snapped an order, and an officer moved to block the view. "What kind of markings?" someone asked. The officer hesitated, looked toward the supervisor, then said, "Not random." She let out a shaky laugh that didn't belong in the cold air. "This is insane," she said. "I hit a snowman. That's it. You're all acting like there was intent." The supervisor finished. "Yes, because that's what we're determining." I saw it then. The full shift. This wasn't about what was under the snow anymore. It was about why it was there, and why she chose that moment, that method, to make a point. Across the scene, choices were being made without me. Radios, notes, photos, every decision narrowing the path forward. The officer who'd first asked my name came back. "Sir," he said quietly, "we're going to need you to come with us shortly, just to talk." She heard that. Her head whipped around. "You're letting him walk away?" "No," he replied evenly. "We're not letting anyone walk away." That was the most honest thing said all night. As they prepared to resume clearing the snow, slower and more deliberate now. I felt the weight of the moment press down harder than before. Whatever was revealed would no longer belong just to me. Or to her. It would belong to the story forming in the minds of everyone watching. And stories, once set in motion, don't care who they hurt, only that they keep moving. They cleared the snow slowly this time. No rush. No spectacle. Every movement deliberate, like they were handling something fragile. Not because it might break, but because it might explain too much. The final layer gave way, and the shape underneath was fully exposed. It wasn't what anyone expected. No weapons. No cash. No dramatic contraband that movies train people to fear. Just a sealed, weather-worn metal container, bolted shut. Its surface marked with dates and coordinates written in permanent marker. The kind of container you don't stumble upon by accident. The kind you prepare. The murmuring stopped. One of the officers looked up at me. Not accusing. Not suspicious. Curious. "What is it?" I exhaled, slow and controlled. This was the moment I'd been running from and preparing for since the first snowfall. "It's evidence," I said. That word landed heavier than anything else that night. The supervisor motioned the others back and crouched near the container, careful not to touch it. "Evidence of what?" "Of something the HOA didn't want documented," I replied. "And something she didn't want anyone digging into." Every head turned toward her. She froze, completely still. No denial this time. No outrage. Just a tight, brittle silence. I went on, voice steady now that the secret was finally in the open. 6 months ago, I noticed irregularities. HOA funds being redirected. Selective enforcement. Complaints filed against certain homeowners, always the same ones. People who pushed back. People who asked questions. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "I started documenting everything," I continued. "Meeting minutes that didn't match decisions. Emails that disappeared. Notices that were issued without votes. When I brought it up quietly, I was told to drop it." The supervisor's gaze sharpened. "And you didn't?" "No," I said. "I archived it." I nodded toward the container. Duplicates. Physical copies. Time-stamped. Stored somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere temporary. Somewhere obvious. A snowman. A sound escaped her then. Not a word. A breath. Thin and panicked. "That's insane," she said weakly. "You can't just—" "You filed a report on me," I interrupted. "Claimed suspicious behavior. You escalated it. I assumed sooner or later someone would push too far. I just didn't think it would be you." The officers exchanged looks. One of them radioed for a forensic unit. Not because they suspected a crime scene, but because they suspected proof. The supervisor stood. "We're going to secure this," he said. "And we're going to need formal statements. From both of you." She shook her head, stepping back. "This is retaliation. He's manipulating the situation." But the words didn't carry anymore. The authority she'd leaned on for years had drained away, replaced by something fragile and exposed. They opened the container later under proper protocol. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. What surprised me was what came next. As they prepared to escort us separately, the supervisor paused beside me. "You knew she'd be the one to act, didn't you?" I hesitated, then told the truth. "I knew someone like her would." He studied me for a long moment. "You could have turned this in anonymously." "Yes," I said, "but then it disappears, or gets buried, or quietly dismissed. And this way, I replied, "it couldn't be ignored." He nodded once. Not approval. Understanding. They took her first. As she passed me, she stopped. Looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not superiority. Fear mixed with realization. "You planned this," she whispered. I shook my head. "I planned for the truth to survive." That was the difference. By morning, the street was quiet again. Snow covered the tire tracks. The flashing lights were gone. The snowman was nothing but a wet outline on the driveway. But the story didn't melt away with it. Investigations followed. Audits. Meetings that suddenly had observers who weren't afraid to speak. The HOA didn't collapse overnight, but it cracked. And once cracks form, they spread. The final twist came weeks later, when an officer returned my container. Empty now. Evidence logged. Copies made. You know, he said casually, if she hadn't hit that snowman, this might have taken years. I looked at the bare driveway and nodded. Winter makes people careless. And sometimes that's exactly what the truth is waiting for. By the time spring arrived, the snow was long gone. But the quiet it left behind felt different. Lighter, like the neighborhood had exhaled after holding its breath for years. The HOA didn't vanish. It didn't implode in some dramatic way that makes headlines. Instead, it changed slowly, the way systems do when they're forced into the light. Audits became routine. Meetings were recorded. Decisions were written down instead of whispered in hallways. People who had once sat silently in the back started raising their hands. As for her, she stepped down before anyone formally asked her to. No apology, no farewell speech, just a short email citing personal reasons. Some neighbors still defended her, saying she meant well, that she was just strict. Maybe that was true once. But good intentions don't excuse unchecked power. And entitlement, left alone long enough, always floors it through something it doesn't understand. People asked me why I didn't just move. I thought about that a lot. I could have sold the house, started fresh somewhere else. Let someone else deal with the rules and the letters and the quiet pressure to conform. But leaving wouldn't have fixed the problem. It would have just passed it on. I stayed because I believed something simple. Silence helps the loudest voice win. The neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped to talk. The elderly man with the garden gnome brought it back out, smiling like he'd reclaimed a small piece of himself. Kids play in the street again without parents worrying about complaints. It's not perfect, but it's honest. And the driveway is just a driveway now. No snowman, no container underneath. Just concrete that warms in the sun and cools at night like it's supposed to. Sometimes I stand there longer than I need to, remembering how something so ordinary became the center of everything. How a winter decoration turned into a mirror. Because that's what it really was. A reflection of how quickly people confuse authority with righteousness, of how easily rules become weapons when empathy is removed, and of how truth doesn't always need to shout. It just needs to survive long enough to be seen. I don't hate her. That surprised me the most. I don't forgive what she did either. But I understand it now. Control feels safe to people who are afraid of losing relevance. And fear makes people careless. Winter proved that. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: you don't always need to fight louder. Sometimes you just need to prepare better. To document, to wait, to trust that the right moment will come, even if it arrives in the form of an SUV and a shattered snowman. Life doesn't usually give us clean villains or perfect heroes. It gives us choices, quiet ones, uncomfortable ones, moments where staying silent is easier than speaking up. And every time the question is the same: what are you willing to stand on when the weight comes down? I built a snowman that winter, not to decorate, but to protect the truth until it was ready. And when it finally came to light, it reminded me of something I'll never forget. Power fears patience, because patience always outlasts it. If the story made you think, if it felt familiar, or if you've ever dealt with someone who mistook control for authority, share this. Talk about it. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary things are hiding the most important truths, just waiting for the right moment to be uncovered.